Welcome to Hard Talk from Belgrade. I'm Kat Amanpour, and we're broadcasting from the ESPAS 2035 conference to a live audience, including primary and secondary school children, and also broadcasting live to the 25 member states of the EU and the 16 affiliate member states. Good evening, everyone. Well, the mood over the past 2 days has been somber and determined. The Universal Foresight Goals, the follow-on from the relatively successful Sustainable Development Goals, so those Universal Foresight Goals have been in place now for 4 years and are doing fairly well. However, we face globally high levels of instability and inequality thanks to the legacy of the last 2.5 decades. We're here to find out how the EU can contribute to global prosperity, well-being, and security. So, welcome. My guests today are Mr. Peter Hagley, who is the Secretary General of the European Congress, and Ms. Maria Nikolic, Director of the EU Strategic Communications Agency, EU Stratcom, where we're sitting today. And both of you, welcome to Hard Talk.
Thank you for having us.
So, Peter, first to you. Given your roles in these relatively new EU bodies, could you remind us, what does Europe look like today in 2035?
Thank you, Kat. It's a pleasure to be on your show today. I'll be quick, as I guess most of your audience members are very aware about recent European history. And to help everyone, I will not be using PowerPoint because we got rid of that in 2020.
Good thing.
20 years ago, we had a similar conference as this one in 2017, also called ESPAS. And at that time, we were reminded that treaty change happened every 10 to 15 years. And indeed, in 2029, we had a new treaty, the Treaty of London. The Treaty of London, allowed for, first of all, more efficient decision-making, because the problem at that point was, especially in foreign and defense policies, decision-making processes were not effective. We dropped unanimity voting on these issues, and we also allowed a right of initiative to parliamentarians. Talking of which, in 2029, we established the European Congress, and the European Congress was made up of the former European Parliament as the lower chamber and the former Council, which became the Senate, the higher chamber of the Congress. The External Action Service became the European Security Council, also covering trade and energy, and the core members of the European Union, so not the 16 affiliate ones, but the core members, delegated their foreign competencies to this new body. The Commission, as always, remained the Commission, and with few other commissioners, we had 10 commissioners since 2030 on a rotating basis. And finally, to mention the composition of the European Union, 25 member states plus 16 affiliates. You are wondering which are the 3 that dropped out since 2017. The UK, Austria and Czech Republic also dropped out, but we included them as affiliate members with opt-outs on issues to do with economic and social programming, military operations, etc. That's the good news. We have political institutions fit for purpose, as Mary Kaldor mentioned 20 years ago. The bad news is that took 20 years. And we went through a new dark age with increasing amounts of Euroscepticism and, of course, some member states dropping out. And let me end this point by saying that even before treaty change, the institutions could have considered more cooperation to achieve a little bit more efficiency in reaching the Union's objectives, and I'm thinking, for example, of legislative procedures, thinking about improving these cooperations take a long time, and sharing of information, every institution keeping their own very carefully, and other more technical issues such as human resources management. That also could have been items for discussion at the time.
Many thanks. Same question to you, Maria.
Hello. I'm happy to host you here in the EU Stratcom agency, which was founded based on the Treaty of London that my colleague mentioned in 2030. So we are in the 6th year of functioning, of building a common, inciting, positive European narrative. Because in the same setup in 2017, we have been told that we are moving from a Europe of dreams to a Europe of necessity. Well, today what we are trying to do is to build a concept of Europe of dreams and necessity. So we're trying here in the EU Stratcom agency to explain to EU citizens why the EU is useful for them, for their everyday life, how it benefits them every day, but also why it is great. Why it is the only place in the world where they have such an amount of freedom and the economic stability that we have, security that we have. So we are gaining self-confidence, which is very important because we're doing so many great things and we have to explain them. Basically, there have been 2 changes in the way we communicate. As I was saying, we have a common EU narrative now and inspiring a very positive one. And we have moved towards agenda setting, because in 2015, 16, 17, we have started to think about Russian propaganda, about hybrid threats. We have started working on them, but it was all reactive. So we were reacting to things happening around us. Now we are using the latest technological advance. We are using this agency and the setup it provides us to create the agenda, to inform citizens, to build their loyalty. And I think these are the 2 main important things that have changed in the way we communicate.
Indeed, the commitment to co-create policy with citizens is one of the key movements forward in the 2029 London Treaty. So, I have a second question for you, Maria. The ESPAS 2035 conference is now drawing to a close today. What's your take on these 2 days of discussions? How has it been different from previous conferences, for example?
Well, we are starting to acknowledge our success in building a transparent, participatory political process. I mean, we have some steps still to make, but we are already seeing the results. On the takeaways, on the things that we have to do a little bit different, because it's always need to improvement, we're never perfect. I'm taking away from this conference the need to engage with groups with different identities. For example, groups with different religions, or for example with centennials, because we have a large group of people over 100 years old. We have to involve with them, and we have to create special policies. We have to communicate Europe to them also, not to leave them behind. I think this is the main idea that I'm taking home with me, although I'm home, not to leave anyone behind.
Thank you. Peter, what are your thoughts on that?
I might be a bit more pessimistic than Maria. In 2017, there was a lot of agreement on the challenges that we face, a lot of agreement on the baseline, on the values that we agree on in order to reflect on the challenges. To the extent that you could be asking, maybe we're missing something, we're missing an opposing voice that would explain why we have no solutions to the known problems that we have already identified. Today, in 2035, it's interesting to hear the views from experts around the world, especially when we notice that what we used to consider common values are now more like European values. Some have mentioned they are Swedish marmalade. That was not the case in 2017. Today, in 2035, views such as gender equality, consumer protection, social standards, all these are not as important to the participants in this conference, and as a European, I deplore that.
Okay. Well, would anybody from the audience like to comment on this? Oh, yes. Yes, please introduce yourself.
Yes. Good afternoon. My name is Anders Lippens. I'm a researcher at Open European University. I do research on EU environmental policy after the Treaty of London and also EU environmental diplomacy.
well, why don't you come and join us? Let's bring a European citizen onto the stage and, join the debate. Come and join us.
Thank
well
you.
done. Thank you. By the way,
Nice
as he's sitting down, I'd also welcome all you other audience members to send any questions through using the hashtag ESPAS35, ESPAS35. Thank you. So, Anders, the same question to you. What's really struck you from the last 2 days?
Well, I must say, I felt great dynamism at this conference, because as some of you have already hinted at, we had some dark years in Europe, especially in the 2020s. And some of these ESPAS conferences in the past have been rather gloomy, but now I really see some reasons for hope, some reasons for optimism. In the field where I work, all these environmental challenges that are coming up to us, it's true that we had to make a lot of sacrifices in Europe in the past decades. You can see it if you look at our changed diets, no meat anymore, almost no fish anymore, our changed patterns of consumption, of mobility, but also all these new environmental problems that are hitting us. Southern Europe has become almost unbearable in summer. The diseases that we used to call tropical are now widespread, like malaria. And probably most importantly, all the disruptions to our hormone systems. So almost anyone I know today needs new technologies to get pregnant. So this is quite gloomy. But as a researcher of sustainability transitions, you could say that the past decades we have really gone through a takeoff and an acceleration of a transition towards sustainability. And now we're getting, at least I am seeing at the horizon signs of a new, stable, sustainable system. So that is very good. And especially if Europe is a bit more optimistic, as I have seen at this conference, but also since a few years much more united, I think we can really confront these challenges.
Excellent. Actually, I've just had a news flash where we've just heard that that China has announced a ban on EU car imports in retaliation to the EU's new product life cycle standards, which China says is aimed at killing off its electric car industry. How do you react to that, Maria?
Well, that would be a very unfortunate development, but what I think is that we cannot slash our standards. We have to stick by them, because the standards we have been developed after extensive consultations with our civic society, and also they are explained to our citizens. So we are not afraid anymore of the so-called manipulation of data, of the so-called fake news. We are now confident that our citizens understand their policies, because the policies have been made with them. And you might be aware of the fact that we have developed, with the help of the new technologies, we have developed 2 ultra-smart applications called Vero and Impact. And actually, all the smartphones, all the ultra-intelligent pads that are sold in Europe come with these applications. You might want to use them or not, but they're there to inform you. So what Impact does, for example, it delivers, as the name says, an impact of our policies customized for you. So you, based on your profile, can check what's the impact on the quality of life of that policy, on your quality of life, on your status, on your income, and long-term also. It's a very smart way to communicate to people how they benefit or how our policies impact their daily lives.
Anders, as a citizen that works on sustainability, what do you think of that?
Yeah, I hadn't heard it, but I must say it doesn't really surprise me, because we know that China has been investing a lot to become another green giant, because Xi Jinping several years ago realized that the pollution that his citizens are experiencing is the single most important threat to his political system. But if it's true, and if this ban is carried out, if others are following it, it could be very harmful for Europe, because we have gained a lot of competitiveness recently in exporting our eco-innovative solutions, such as our cars. But if I may say a word about these standards, indeed, governing sustainability through standards is a very traditional policy instrument of Europe. We've done it in the past, but it has been extremely difficult to carry it on throughout all these years of legislative gridlock. and not to mention all these scandals of the diesel and whatever. But standards are now back in fashion, and it's really connected to our European values. And it's not anymore the end-of-pipe emission standards of the past, but as you said, product life cycle standards. So these standards of products, including cars, really take into account the entire life cycle of that product, including the very extraction phase of rare metals in Africa, for instance, and their social impact and environmental impact there.
I'm going to turn to Peter in a second, but I've just received a question from Aurélie Valtat, and she says that there are indications that we're losing IQ in a significant way due to endocrinal perturbations. What do you have to say about that, Anders?
Well, that's exactly what, we used to have the European Environment Agency, yeah? Now it's all with other agencies transformed into the EU Knowledge Agency, but they have warned us since the 2010s that, all the plastics, all the several products, pesticides that we were using are harmful to our bodies, to our hormones, to everything. That's why we have banned them. But of course, there is an enormous time lag effect, so it will take several decades before it is phased out of our systems, unfortunately.
Wow, thank you.
Yeah.
So, Peter, back to you for some comments on the China standards issue.
Indeed. I do note that the BBO gives you some very vintage phones these days, but anyway.
They're antiques.
Back on the issue, yes, it is bad news. The European Congress Foresight Directorate had identified this last year as a potential development for following this policy of ours. And it's all about the fact that we don't agree on values anymore and standards. The European Union is finding it difficult to have its standards recognized, not even implemented in the rest of the world. And this is maybe due to a lost opportunity we had 20 years ago. Back in 2017, we talked a lot about standards. We talked a lot about values. But in practice, we really focused on managing internal crises. Remember the migration, terrorism, fake news, politics of identity. Former Carl Bildt who mentioned that 20 years ago. But there was very little long-term strategy. We were very good at finding quick fixes to these problems. We were world leaders in quick fixes, actually, but maybe less so in strategy. Meanwhile, our member states, they used to focus on bilateral deals, especially with the larger countries in our neighborhood. And officially, we were the champions of democracy, rule of law, human rights, fundamental freedoms. But that was really what we were championing through our statements, through our spokesperson statements. Meanwhile, the real deals were happening elsewhere. So now I'm very happy to note that the Congress these days and also the Commission President Vestager, I must note, are working on red lines with very much more rigorously than before in order to have a stronger European Union in defending them. And I think that's what the citizens expect of us.
And how's the relationship of the Secretary General of the Congress with President Vestager? I've heard that it's been a little bit rocky in the past, but how's it going at the moment?
Politically, the relationship between the President of the Congress and the President of the Commission is excellent. There's a very good working relationship, and I personally get on very well with the Secretary General of the Commission, Mrs. Anne Mettler, as you can expect.
Excellent. Okay. Final question then. And actually back to you. I'm going to put you on the spot again, Peter. Next year, in 2036, the European elections will take place. So what are the key issues going to be for the upcoming elections? And looking back at what was discussed during this conference, what should be the EU's priorities for the next mandate to make Europe future-proof out to 2050?
So next year we have elections indeed. Last time when we had elections, a lot of the campaign was around security. That was in 2030, the first elections for the European Congress. We worked on privacy terrorism and hijacking of personal control devices. A lot of work has been going on these issues over the last 5 years, but it's likely to remain something important for the electorate. I will go back to what I think are the long-term threats to our values and standards. Our citizens also see these as very important issues. New external threats are emerging. We have the China-India conflict, the tensions in West Africa with booming demographics in Nigeria, and of course the fallout from the bio-explosion in Indonesia 3 years ago. So, of course, the campaign of our pan-European parties will center on security issues, but I believe there will be an important part on values and standards for the years to come, and that's important to protect our culture and ways of living.
Many thanks, Peter. Over to you, Maria.
I agree with my colleague that our cultural imprint, for example, in Africa is becoming more and more important, and our strategy for 2050 is becoming much more outward. We are again building on our aspiration to be a global leader. But on my field of expertise, I'm very interested to see the Eurobarometer, which comes out next month, in order to assess how the level of engagement of our citizens has changed based on how we have changed our working methods. Because we have improved our transparency a lot. I'm sure you know that virtually all our work, our debates, our votes are now accessible online via web real-time communication, and that the citizens can put in their input in real time via social intranets community. So basically we have opened the decision-making process, the political process, to all the citizens. If they want to get engaged, only from their ultra-smart pads, they can get engaged with us, they can give us feedback, and we take it into account. It's a perfectible system, but we're making steps into integrating everybody.
But what do you make of the move of recent pan-European parties to actually ban matrix children from being part of their political parties? These are the children that are so plugged into the internet that they're not actually engaging much with the real world, and quite a few parties have decided to take the step to say politics is about face-to-face as well as online engagement, and you need to commit to both. So in terms of voice, how do you think about that? Is it right to ban them, these matrix children, or not?
You know, we believe in inclusiveness, and we want everybody, as I said before, the new idea that's leading communication in Europe is not to leave anyone behind. So we're finding tools to reach everybody. If you are a digital person, you have the tools. If you want to engage face-to-face, you have the tools. And not only that, but we're trying to, again, export our model to the outside world, and we're trying to look ahead again, to regulate other areas, to regulate artificial intelligence, for example, to look into connectivity, for example, interfaith and inter-religion. We're doing a lot to become more inclusive and more transparent.
Brilliant. So Jason Blackstock, matrix children are in. Final to you, Anders.
Okay, thank you, Kat. Yeah, I will stick to the topic that I am most passionate about, which is the environment. I would hope that for the elections, the European leaders will tell their voters that the transition to a circular economy, the transition to a low-carbon society is paying off. So yes, we have made fundamental changes, but we are gaining in quality of life. This is very visible now in Europe. I mean, and just for instance, a few weeks ago, we had the publication of the 8th assessment report by the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, which says that climate change finally seems to be slowing down. This is very good news. And I mean, this message needs to be taken globally as well, as the EU is doing, to continue its leadership, because to my eyes, it's still the only credible leader on this topic. And it should do so by showing solidarity with the victims of climate change. I mean, I was last year at the Climate and Security Summit in Damascus, and it was seen as a very, very big sign of goodwill by the EU that it committed to pay the largest part of the cost of the relocation of the population of Fiji to an artificial island in front of the Australian coast. So this is very important, but also not only solidarity, but showing example, as we are doing with these product lifecycle standards. This is very important to show our values. And I think we need to work with the other actors, and by that, of course, I mean the cities all over the world and the new citizens movements, to show that it works and that it pays off. And frankly, this is the only way how we are going to avoid being overwhelmed by the instability in our borders. As Mr. Hagley said, the Indo-China conflict was based largely on water and resources, same in West Africa, so we really need to do this. But I think if anyone can do it, it's Europe.
Excellent. Well, that's a great point at which to finish, and I know next up is Elon Musk, who's now taken a retirement job as Senior Technology Ambassador and Risk Taker to the EU, STAR. So really, we have to end there, really. I'd like to thank you all very much for being on Hard Talk. Thanks to our audience, and here at home and in Belgrade. So good night. Thank you very much.